He was 74 years old. He had worked leather for 50 years and built things with his hands that outlasted the people who ordered them. His children took everything: the house, the car, the savings account with his wife's name still on it. When it was done, they handed him $40 and a dog lead and pointed him at a motel on the edge of Feltham. The one thing they left him with was a deed to a derelict building on Millrace Street that the county had assessed at almost nothing: a rope walk. Shuttered for 30 years. Nobody in Feltham had looked at it twice in all that time. He looked at it once and saw something nobody else had seen. What he built inside that building changed the shape of an entire town. His children came back when the newspaper ran the story. They stood outside the fence and had nothing useful to say. But I need to take you back to the beginning. Eugene Pratt had spent his working life making things that held. Harness straps and saddle panels, work boots resoled so many times the original leather was just a memory under the repair. Custom belts for men who wore them every day and brought them back 20 years later because they had outlasted everything else in their lives. He had opened his shop on the edge of Feltham at 22 years old with borrowed tools and a second-hand skiving knife, and he had run it for 43 years before his hands began to slow and the arthritis in his right wrist made the close finish work too unreliable to sell. He retired at 65. He put the tools in the closet. He did not know what to do with himself for about a year, and then he got used to it the way you get used to most things, which is slowly and never quite completely. His wife Pauline had died 4 years before all of this. She had been the one who kept the house organized and the social calendar moving, and who remembered to call people on their birthdays. After Pauline was gone, the house got quieter in a way that was specific to her absence rather than to silence in general. Eugene kept the place tidy. He walked Pepper in the mornings, a rough-coated brown dog of no particular breed who had arrived at the shop door 11 years ago and never left. He cooked simple meals and ate at the kitchen table where he and Pauline had eaten together for 36 years. He was not unhappy. He was not the kind of man who described himself at all, really. He was simply living, which at 74 felt like enough. His son Craig had opinions about this arrangement that Eugene had never solicited. Craig was 46 and managed the regional logistics operation for a freight company 3 towns over. He wore collared shirts with the top button open and spoke in the particular tone of someone who had spent years explaining things to people who had not asked for the explanation. He called Eugene every few weeks, usually on Sunday evenings, and the conversations had a shape to them that never varied much. Craig would ask how everything was going. Eugene would say fine. Craig would note that the house was a lot of space for one person. Eugene would say it was the right amount of space. Craig would mention the property taxes. Eugene would say he had them covered. This went on for 2 years. In the spring of the 3rd year after Pauline died, Craig called on a Wednesday, which was unusual, and he did not open with, "How is everything going?" He opened with, "I have been talking to Lorraine, and we think we have found something that would really work for you." Lorraine was Eugene's daughter. She was 42 and lived 40 minutes south and worked in hospital administration and loved Eugene in the way that people love someone they feel guilty about. She called more than Craig did and visited less, which Eugene understood without judging it. She brought food when she came, more than he could eat, and she straightened things in the kitchen that did not need straightening. What Craig and Lorraine had found was a care facility on the south edge of Feltham. Clean, well-rated, a private room. Craig explained the finances in considerable detail. The house, once sold, would more than cover several years at the facility. The property taxes on the house had indeed increased. The neighborhood was shifting. It was a good time to sell. This was responsible planning. This was what Pauline would have wanted, Craig said, and that was the sentence that told Eugene exactly what kind of conversation this was. He said he would think about it. Craig said he had already spoken to the facility director. The room was available now, and that kind of availability did not last. 3 weeks later, Craig and Lorraine arrived on a Saturday morning with boxes in a van. Eugene stood in his kitchen and watched this happen with a feeling he could not name then, and could not name for a long time afterward. It was not quite shock because some part of him had known. It was something closer to the feeling of a door closing on a room you thought you would always be able to walk back into. Craig carried boxes. Lorraine folded things carefully and did not make eye contact. When Eugene asked about his tools, she said the facility did not have storage for a full workshop. When he asked about the furniture, she said most of it would go to auction. When he asked about Pepper, Craig said the facility did not allow dogs and that they would find a good home for him, and Eugene said that he and Pepper would be leaving together, or he would not be leaving at all, and something in the way he said it settled the matter without further discussion. They drove him to the extended stay motel on the western edge of town that afternoon. Craig carried the suitcase inside and paid for the first week at the front desk. He stood in the doorway of the room afterward and looked at Eugene, and for one moment his jaw tightened in a way that was not anger, but something else, something that recognized what it was doing even as it kept doing it. Then he nodded and said, "Call me if you need anything," and walked back to the van. Lorraine had not come inside. She was in the back seat for the whole drive. When Craig was carrying the suitcase in, she put her hand against the van window and held it there for a moment, pressed flat against the glass, and then she took it away, as if she had reached for something and then thought better of it, as if the gesture itself had surprised her. Eugene saw it from the motel doorway. He did not know if she knew he had seen it. He went inside. He sat on the edge of the bed. Pepper jumped up and lay down beside him without being called. He had $40. The first week he ate at the diner 2 blocks over and was careful. By the end of the second week, the $40 were gone and he was living on the packets of crackers and instant oatmeal the motel provided in a basket by the coffee maker. The motel manager, a woman named Bet, who had been quietly kind in the way of people who work the front desk of modest places and have seen a great deal, let him run 3 days past his paid checkout without saying anything about it. On the morning of the 4th day, she brought him a paper bag with a sandwich and a banana, and said, "Eugene, I cannot carry you further than this, and I am sorry." He said she had nothing to be sorry for. He thanked her. He took Pepper and the suitcase and walked out into the Feltham morning, which was cool and grey, and smelled like rain that had not arrived yet. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment before he started walking. He had lived in Feltham for 74 years and had never stood on a sidewalk with nowhere specific to go. It was a strange and particular feeling. Not panic, something quieter and worse than panic. The feeling of a thread that has been cut and has not yet begun to fall. He did not have a plan. He walked the way you walk when you do not have a plan, which is not aimlessly but without a fixed destination, following what looks possible rather than what you intended. He walked south down Millrace Street with Pepper on the frayed lead, and he passed the hardware store and the closed-up laundromat and the grain elevator that had not processed grain in 15 years but had never come down because nobody had the money or the interest to take it down. He passed the empty lot where the old feed store used to be, and then he was standing at the far end of Millrace Street, looking at a chain-link fence and a gate secured with a padlock that had rusted to the color of old blood. And behind the fence was a long, low building that stretched back from the street in the particular way that buildings built for a specific industrial purpose always do. Not outward, but deep, the whole structure arranged around the single corridor of its function. A rope walk. He knew what it was immediately. The shape was unmistakable if you knew what you were looking at, and most people did not. There was a county auction notice stapled to a post by the gate. He read it. He read it twice. The assessed value was $400. The minimum bid was $350. The auction was in 6 days. He stood there for a long time. He walked the perimeter of the fence, Pepper trotting beside him. He looked at the roof line through the gaps in the boards that covered the high, narrow windows. He looked at the grade of the ground around the foundation. He had spent 50 years learning to read the structural intentions of things made by hand, and the rope walk read to him the way a book reads to someone who has spent their life with books, not effort, but fluency. The roof was low-pitched and intact. The walls were brick with a rubble-stone foundation, and the mortar was intact where he could see it. The floor would be wide plank, pine or oak, depending on when it was built, and it would be solid because you did not build a working floor that flexed under the tension of rope-twisting machines. There was a raised loft section at the far end that suggested storage. The whole structure was probably 120 feet long by 22 feet wide. It was not ruin. It was dormancy. He pressed his face against a gap in the fence boards and looked for a long time, and Pepper sat down beside him and waited. He had $31 and some change. He walked to the county administrative office and asked the woman at the front desk how the auction worked. She explained it. He asked if there was a minimum deposit required to enter a bid. She said there was not, that the deposit was due only upon winning the auction, and that it could be paid within 24 hours. He asked if anyone else had registered to bid on the Millrace Street rope walk. She checked the system and said no. He registered. 6 days later, he was the only bidder. He bid $350. The county accepted. He had 24 hours to produce the deposit. He went back to bet at the motel. He explained the situation plainly. He asked if she would lend him $350 against the deed to the property as collateral. He said he understood if the answer was no. She looked at him for a while, and then she said, "I have known you for 3 weeks, Eugene, and I have never heard you ask for a single thing for yourself." And she wrote him a check. He paid the deposit. He paid the remainder over the following 30 days by methods that belong in the middle of this story rather than here. The deed came through on a Tuesday afternoon. He folded it twice and put it in his jacket pocket beside the small coil of hand-twisted cord he had been carrying for 56 years, a piece of braided leather he had made as an 18-year-old apprentice, his first real finished piece of work, the thing he had made to prove to himself and to the man who trained him that he could do this. He had carried it every day since. He took the cord out and held it for a moment, and then he put the deed with it. He walked to the rope walk with Pepper and the suitcase, and he opened the gate with the key the county had given him, and he stood in the doorway of the building for the first time and breathed in the smell of old wood and stone dust, and something faintly chemical that was probably the residue of decades of rope oil, and he felt something he had not felt since he used to unlock his own shop in the morning, which was the feeling of a space that was his to work in. He found a painter's drop cloth folded on a high shelf at the back of the building. He spread it on the wide plank floor near the center of the space where a gap in the boards let in a blade of late afternoon light. He lay down on it. Pepper pressed against him immediately. He reached up and found a nail in the wall above his head, and he hung the coil of cord on it. He looked up at it in the fading light. He slept better than he had in months. He did not know why exactly, whether it was the silence or the solidity of the floor under him, or simply the fact that for the first time in weeks his situation, however difficult, was one he had chosen. There is a particular kind of rest that comes from being the author of your own circumstances, even when those circumstances are hard. He had not had that feeling since before Craig's call on that Wednesday. He had it now. In the morning, he walked the entire length of the building with the professional focus of a man who is not looking at what is in front of him, but at what could be. The floor was white oak, wide plank, solid as the day it was laid. The roof had 2 minor spots of compromise at the north end, but the main span was sound. The brick walls had a section of spalling near the west window that needed repointing but was not structural. The loft was intact and dry, which he had not expected, and when he climbed up into it, he found not just storage space, but something he had not anticipated at all. A ledger. It was sitting on a plain wooden shelf against the back wall of the loft, sealed in a sleeve of oilcloth that had kept it dry through decades of weather and abandonment. It was a commercial transaction ledger, the kind that businesses used to keep before computers made physical records obsolete. It ran from 1904 through 1967. Every page was a record of rope sales. Date, customer name, footage purchased, price paid. He sat on the loft floor and read it for a very long time. The name Pratt appeared on page after page. His father, Calvin Pratt, had been a customer here for decades. 41 separate transactions over the years, beginning in 1922, when Calvin was a young man starting the small farm operation that the family had kept until Eugene was a teenager. Eugene could trace the arc of his father's life in the rope purchases. The early years were modest. The middle years grew. The later years shrank back as the farm reduced itself. The last entry for Calvin Pratt was 1958. On page 87 of the ledger, there was a single entry that stopped Eugene cold. June the 14th, 1959. Pratt, E., age 9. 6 feet jump rope. He did not remember buying it. He must have been with his father. He must have asked. He sat in the loft of the rope walk that was now his and looked at his own name written in someone else's hand 65 years ago, and he could not find a single word for what he felt. So he just sat there until the feeling settled enough to carry. He did not tell anyone about the ledger for a week. He had work to do first. The first thing he needed was tools. He had left his workshop tools in the house on Craig's timeline, and that was a fact he was not going to spend energy on. He could acquire tools. What he could not acquire was the knowledge of how to use them, and that he already had. He walked to Feltham Hardware on the second morning after acquiring the rope walk, and he looked at the tools available, and he calculated what he absolutely needed, and what he could improvise without. He was standing at the workbench section doing this calculation when he noticed that the cabinet door below the register was hanging wrong, the left hinge clearly stripped. Without particularly thinking about it, he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his folding knife and 2 strips of scrap leather he had picked up from the warehouse lot on the way into town, and he cut and punched and fixed the hinge in about 3 minutes, while the store owner, a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and the hands of someone who had never been afraid of work, watched him from the other side of the counter without saying a word. When he was done, she looked at the hinge. She opened and closed the cabinet door twice. She looked at him. Her name was Adele Korn. She had run Feltham Hardware for 22 years. She did not give credit to people she did not know. She took a notepad from beside the register and wrote down a tab for the tools Eugene needed and slid it across the counter and said, "Pay me when you can." He said he would pay her in 30 days. She said she had not asked for a timeline. He paid her in 22 days, which he will explain later in this story. The first project was the front section of the rope walk, the roughly 20 feet nearest the street. He worked it the way he worked leather, which was to say systematically and without hurrying, understanding that the quality of what you build is a direct product of your willingness to take the time the work requires. He repointed the worst of the mortar. He patched the 2 spots in the roof with materials salvaged from a collapsed outbuilding at the back of the property. He repaired the wide front doors with new hardware from Adele's shop. He swept the floor. It was not impressive to look at from the outside, but when he stepped back inside and stood in the front section of the rope walk with the work done, the space was clean and dry and solid, and it was his, and that was more than he had had 3 weeks ago. Word moved through Feltham the way word always moves through a small town, which is not through any organized system but through the particular networks of people who talk to each other in the right order. The hardware store, the diner, the post office, where the postmaster collected information the way he collected mail, carefully and without waste. People began to drive slowly past the rope walk on Millrace Street. A few stopped. None came in yet. Adele came in on a Thursday morning, 8 days after the tool arrangement. She did not explain why she had come. She walked the length of the building and looked at the ceiling and pressed on the floor in a few places with her foot. She said the roof work at the north end needed tar paper under the patch material, and she would bring some by. Eugene said he appreciated it. She said she was not doing it for him. She was doing it because a shoddy repair annoyed her on principle. He said he understood perfectly. She brought the tar paper the next morning, and he noticed there was a coil of new rope in the truck bed as well, which she did not mention. and he did not mention. He found Joey on a Thursday morning 2 weeks into the work. Pepper found him, technically. It was just before 4 in the morning, and Pepper had been restless and whining in a way that meant something was wrong and not merely that she wanted out. So Eugene got up and put on his jacket and took her outside, and she went directly around the back of the rope walk to the alley behind the building, and there was a boy sitting against the back wall of the grain elevator next door with his arms around his knees and his chin down. He was 16, though he looked younger and older simultaneously in the way of people who have been living outside for a while. He was wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the temperature, and he had a pack beside him that contained what appeared to be everything he owned. He looked up when Pepper reached him. Pepper sat down 2 feet away and looked at him with the particular attention she gave to people who needed it. Eugene said it was cold to be sleeping out here. The boy said he had been in colder places. Eugene said he had food and a floor inside, and the boy could come in if he wanted to. The boy looked at him for a moment, and then at Pepper, and then he got up and picked up his pack and followed Eugene inside without another word. His name was Joey. He did not offer a last name, and Eugene did not ask for one. He ate what Eugene had, which was soup from a can heated on the small camp stove and crackers from the packet. And when he had eaten, he said something that surprised Eugene. He said, "I do not want charity. I want a job." Eugene said he did not know exactly what he was building yet. Joey said that was all right. He could see it was going to be something. And when Eugene figured out what it was, he would need someone who could carry things and was not afraid of work. Eugene looked at him across the camp stove. He said, "That is you, is it?" Joey said that was him. Eugene said all right. He showed Joey where to spread his bedroll. Joey put his pack against the wall and lay down and was asleep in about 4 minutes. Pepper lay down between them. Eugene sat up for a while and looked at the coil of cord on the nail by the door and thought about what a person owes another person when they have almost nothing and they open the door anyway, and whether the scale of what you give matters at all compared to the scale of what it costs you to give it. He decided it did not. Joey turned out to be exactly what he had said he was. He was strong for his size, and he had a mechanical understanding of physical problems that was instinctive rather than taught, the kind of spatial intelligence that no amount of education gives you if you do not already have it. He could look at a structural problem and see the solution before Eugene could articulate it. He asked good questions and he learned from the answers, and he did not ask the same question twice. 2 weeks after Joey arrived, Chet Morrow showed up at the front door on a Wednesday afternoon. He was 58, broad across the shoulders with a back injury that had moved him through work and out of it over the years, and was currently between jobs. He had heard about the rope walk from Adele at the hardware store. He said he had skills in framing and basic electrical, and he was looking for work he could do without making the back worse. And he had heard this place might need a hand. He said it in the flat, economical way of someone who has learned to ask for things without dressing the asking up. He was carrying a single box of tools. He had set it down on the floor beside him when he knocked, and Eugene noticed that when Chet gestured around the space, he picked the box back up first and set it down again afterward, as if he needed to know exactly where it was. As if it was the one thing he was certain of. Eugene said he could not pay him yet, but that there was room and food and the work was real. Chet said that was enough for now. Eugene said all right. He showed him where to put his tools. Chet carried the box himself. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that Eugene had not experienced since the shop. He was the first up and the last to stop. He worked in the particular way of a man who has spent his life understanding that the quality of a thing is visible in every choice you make along the way, not just the final result. Joey matched his pace with the energy of someone who has never been allowed to work at his full capacity and is discovering for the first time what he can actually do. Chet worked steadily and without drama and knew more about framing than he had claimed, which was a pattern Eugene was beginning to recognize in people who described themselves modestly and then exceeded every expectation. The second section of the rope walk went faster than the first, then the third. The loft was reinforced and became a proper sleeping area. The central corridor of the building was opened up and cleaned back to its original bones, and the bones were good. Eugene's leather workbench, assembled from 2 heavy workbenches retrieved from a property clearance on the north edge of town, was set up in the front quarter of the space with the best light. People began to stop by, not many and not all at once, but steadily, in the organic way of small-town curiosity finding its object. Retired tradespeople came first, the way they always do, drawn by the sight of actual work being done. A retired stonemason named Ted spent 2 Saturdays repointing the entire west wall without being asked. A woman from the Methodist Church on 4th Street brought 2 pots of soup and a bag of bread rolls and said nothing about it except that she would leave the pots and come back for them later. Adele stopped by twice a week now and always found something to contribute that she presented as a practical transaction rather than a gift, and the kindness was not diminished by the framing. On a Saturday evening in the 8th week, Eugene finished the table. It was a long work table, 8 feet of reclaimed white oak with new legs he had turned himself using a lathe borrowed from Ted, the stonemason. He had finished the top surface with an oil he had mixed himself from a recipe he had been using for 40 years. He set it in the center of the main corridor under the best of the overhead lights, and he and Joey moved it twice to get it exactly right. And when it was right, he stood back and looked at it, and it was a real table, the kind that would outlast everyone in the room. He cooked that evening. He had been given a proper camp stove by someone who had not named themselves, but left it at the front door one morning with a note that said it was not being used. He made a chili from dried beans and canned tomatoes and the kind of rough-cut vegetables that are available at any small-town grocery for almost nothing if you are willing to work with them. He made enough for the 3 of them, and then made more, because you always make more. They ate at the table Eugene had built in the rope walk on Millrace Street, in the town where Eugene had lived his entire life and from which he had been removed with $40 and a dog and a suitcase 3 months before. Joey ate with the appetite of someone who is no longer rationing. Chet ate steadily and said the chili was the best he'd eaten in a long time. Pepper lay under the table. It was a meal. It was just a meal. But it was the first meal at a table that was theirs in a place that was theirs, and that fact put a weight on every bite that had nothing to do with the food. If you have made it this far into Eugene's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Eugene showed Adele the ledger on a Sunday morning about a week after the first shared meal. She sat in the front section of the rope walk and turned the pages carefully, the way you handle something that has been waiting longer than you have been alive. She read for a long time without speaking. When she found the entry for Calvin Pratt, 1922, she stopped and looked up at Eugene. He nodded. She kept reading. When she found the entry for E. Pratt, age 9, 6 feet jump rope, June the 14th, 1959, she put the ledger down in her lap and looked out the window for a long moment. She said, "Eugene, this place remembers everybody." He said that was exactly what he had thought. She said it needed to be preserved and documented, and that she knew someone at the Historical Society who needed to be told about this. He said he had not been ready to share it yet. She said she understood that. She asked when he would be ready. He said maybe now. The letter from the County Building Compliance Office arrived on a Tuesday in the 10th week. It cited the property for non-compliance with codes governing occupied residential structures, specifically the lack of a second means of egress from the loft sleeping area, inadequate bathroom facilities for the number of occupants, and electrical work conducted without a permit. It set a deadline of 30 days. It said failure to achieve compliance would result in a condemnation order and mandatory vacating of the premises. Eugene read the letter twice, and then he put it on the table and said nothing for a while. Then he called Adele. Adele called Ted. Ted called the retired electrician who lived on Birch Road and had been driving slowly past the rope walk for 3 weeks. The electrician called 2 other people, Adele called the woman from the Methodist church, who called 3 more people from the congregation. The word moved through Feltham the way word moves there, which is faster than you expect and with more force than you planned for. There was something that Feltham had needed to say yes to for a long time and had not found a clear occasion for. The county notice, as it turned out, was the occasion. By Thursday morning, there were 11 people working inside the rope walk. The second egress from the loft was framed and fitted with a proper exterior stair in 4 days. The bathroom facilities were expanded and brought to code in 8 days. The electrical work was properly permitted and completed in 12. Every deficiency in the letter was addressed before the deadline. The community did this, not because anyone organized it, but because a small town knows its own, and what was happening on Millrace Street had begun to feel like something that belonged to all of them, not just to the man who had started it. The inspector arrived on the 28th day. He was a county employee named Ruiz, who had the look of a man who came expecting to close things down and had developed a certain efficiency around that expectation. He walked the building with his clipboard and his checklist, and he checked everything. He took a long time. He found nothing that did not pass. He stood at the front door on his way out, and he looked at the building the way Eugene had looked at it from outside the fence on that first morning, with the particular attention of someone who was revising an assumption. He looked at the table Eugene had built. He looked at Joey, who was sanding a section of window frame in the good light. He looked at Chet, who was finishing a fitting on the new egress stair. He looked at Pepper, who was lying in a patch of sunlight by the door. He looked at the nail by the door and the coil of cord hanging on it. He asked what that was. Eugene said it was the first thing he ever made. Ruiz looked at it for another moment. He wrote something in his notebook. He said the property passed inspection. He said the work here was better than what he usually found in properties twice the age. He said it in the flat official way of someone who is not given to elaboration but means what he says. Then he walked out to his truck and drove away. Joey said, from the window frame he was sanding, "Did that just happen?" Eugene said it appeared so. The story reached the Feltham Courier 3 weeks later. A reporter named Alicia Brent had heard about the ledger from someone at the Historical Society, and she came by on a Thursday afternoon with a notepad and no photographer, and sat at Eugene's table and listened to him talk about the rope walk's history, and about the ledger and about what he had found in the loft. She asked about the people living there. Joey talked to her for about 15 minutes and said more to her than he had said to anyone in a long time, which told Eugene something about the quality of the reporter. Chet said a few sentences, and she wrote every one of them down. The article ran on the front page of the Friday edition. The headline was about the ledger. The text was about what had been built in the rope walk and what it had become. The story was picked up by the regional paper the following Monday. The regional paper ran it with photographs that Alicia brought back and took herself. The Feltham Town Council took up the matter at the following month's public meeting. Several members of the audience spoke. Adele spoke. Ted spoke. The woman from the Methodist church spoke. The council voted to present Eugene Pratt with the Feltham Community Stewardship Award, the first time it had been given in 11 years. The presentation was made at the close of the meeting. Eugene received it without a speech. He said, "Thank you." He sat down. The room applauded for longer than awards usually get applauded at town council meetings, which is a specific kind of measurement worth noting. Craig drove up the following Saturday morning. Eugene saw his car from the front window. He took his time finishing what he was doing, which was cutting a pattern for a new piece of commissioned leather work, the first paid order he had received in response to the newspaper story. Then he went outside. Craig was standing at the chain-link fence. He had not come through the gate. He was wearing the kind of weekend clothing that costs more than it looks like it costs, and he had his hands in his pockets in a way that was trying to be casual and was not quite managing it. He said he had seen the article. He said it was something. He said it was really something, Dad. Eugene stood on his side of the fence. He said, You loaded my tools into boxes and left them at the motel office without telling me you had done it, Craig. I found them when Bet called me. I want you to know I know about that. You did that after you left me there, which means you thought about it and went back and did it and did not tell me. Craig said he had wanted Eugene to have his tools. Eugene said, I know you did. I'm telling you that I know you are more complicated than the worst thing you did. That does not mean the worst thing you did was not the worst thing you did. Craig said nothing. Eugene said, I have everything I need. If you want to write me a letter sometime, I will read it. That is what I have available right now. Craig said okay. He stood there for another moment, and then he walked back to his car, and he sat in it for what Eugene estimated was about 5 minutes before he started the engine and drove away. Eugene watched him go, and then went back inside and finished the pattern he had been cutting. Lorraine called 2 weeks later. She called on a Sunday evening, which was when she always called. She said she was sorry. She said she had known what Craig was planning, and she had not said anything, and she had thought about little else since. She said she did not know how to explain it except that she had been afraid, and that fear was not an excuse. Eugene said, I know you put your hand on the window of the van when Craig took the suitcase inside Lorraine. I saw it. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I almost got out. He said, I know. He said, the door here is open, but you will need to come through it yourself. I'm not going to walk toward you on this one. That part belongs to you. She said she understood. He said he hoped she would come. Then he said good night, and he set the phone down. Spring came slowly to Feltham that year, the way it does when winter does not want to let go. But by the second week of April, the light was arriving earlier in the mornings and landing differently in the rope walk, coming through the high windows at an angle that moved through the day and lit different parts of the interior at different hours. Eugene had learned the light the way you learn a place you intend to stay in. He knew where the best working light fell in the morning, and where it moved to by 2 in the afternoon, and where it went in the evening. He had organized his bench accordingly, the way a craftsman always arranges his work around the light, rather than asking the light to accommodate him. The leather work had grown into something. The first commissioned piece, a custom belt with a particular pattern the customer had specified, had led to 3 more orders by word of mouth. A saddle repair came in from a ranch operation 30 miles out that had heard about Eugene from a feed supply dealer. A woman in the next county who made Western wear for rodeo competitors sent work that she could not take on herself. Eugene worked at his bench in the front section with the light coming in from the street side and Pepper lying under the bench and the sound of whatever Joey and Chet were working on somewhere in the building behind him. Joey had been enrolled in the distance learning program through the county school district since January. He sat at the table Eugene had built and worked through his coursework in the evenings with the particular determination of someone who has decided something and is not going to be talked out of it. He was going to finish school. That was settled. He had also begun to show an interest in the leather work, the way some people show interest in a skill, which is not by asking questions, but by watching with a quality of attention that is different from ordinary watching. Eugene had begun to include him in the work without making a project of it, the same way his own trainer had included him 50 years ago. Chet had taken up a partnership with a retired electrician on some residential repair work in the area that used his framing skills more than his bad back. He came back to the rope walk in the evenings and on weekends and had developed an interest in the historical documentation of the building that surprised everyone, including himself. He had spent 3 weekends cross-referencing the ledger against the county historical records and had produced a document that the Historical Society had asked to archive. 3 properties on Millrace Street had been taken up in the 9 months since the newspaper story. A retired teacher had bought the former laundromat and was converting it into a small lending library with a reading room. A young couple from the next town had taken the vacant lot and were beginning a community garden with beds they planned to rent to residents. A former diner cook had reopened the shuttered diner at the north end of the street and was doing modest but steady business. The street was not transformed. That would be too large a word for what had happened. But it was different from what it had been. Something had been demonstrated that the street had not known needed demonstrating, which was that a derelict space could become something alive if someone with the right knowledge and the right stubbornness was willing to look at it long enough. On a Thursday morning in late April, Eugene was at his bench when he heard the gate at the front of the property. He looked up. Through the window he could see a couple standing at the gate, a man and a woman, both of them somewhere in their mid-30s. And they had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have run out of obvious options and are standing in front of an option they are not sure about. The man was holding a dog on a lead, a small grey dog of no particular description. Eugene wiped his hands on his work cloth and went to the door. He opened the gate. He looked at them. They looked at him. The woman said they had read about the rope walk in the paper and they were in a situation and they were not sure if this was the right place to come, but they had not known where else to go. Eugene said, "Come in." He did not ask what kind of situation. He did not ask if they had money or skills or anything in particular to contribute. He stood back from the gate, and they came through it, the man and the woman and the small grey dog, and Eugene went in ahead of them to put a pot on because it was cold out, and they looked like they needed something warm. He passed the nail by the door where the coil of cord had been hanging since the first night. He did not look at it as he passed. He did not need to. It had been there long enough that it was simply part of the door now, the way the things that have earned their place stop needing to announce themselves. The cord had been hanging there since that first night, and by now it simply meant somebody lived here who knew how to build a thing that lasts. I want to know how this story sat with you. Whatever you felt making it to this point in Eugene's story, share it in the comments below. There is no wrong answer, and there is no feeling that does not belong here. And tell me where you are watching from today. I want to know where this community reaches. Drop your city or your country below and let us see how far this goes. Here is the question I have been sitting with since I first put this story together. Has anyone in your life ever had a skill or a knowledge, something they had spent years building, that the people around them completely failed to see for what it was? Someone whose hands knew things that nobody around them thought to ask about. I think a great many of us have watched that happen and said nothing, and wished later that we had said something. If that is a person you are thinking of right now, put their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. Thank you for staying all the way through this one. The next story is already coming, and I think it is going to stay with you.